Like that's why I tell people, stay safe and stay soapy because
Stay soapy.
stay soapy. Like don't forget to wash your hands every interaction. If you can, probably use a hand sanitizer.
So we've already heard from a nurse before in the series, but we can't hear too much from those who are serving on the front lines. Cedrik is a nurse and a friend of mine who has some hopeful stories and a couple facts about what we are dealing with in this pandemic.
Before I thought that for us younger people, like we can pretty much recover from it good, but nowadays we're taking it differently. It's better to be extra cautious about it, even though you say you're healthy, you exercise, you eat good.
Yeah.
It's always better to just be prepared for it. Because I think statistically wise, I think 20% who are affected by it severely, I would say, who has a lot of symptoms would be people who are under 40 years old.
Really?
That's 20%. Fatality rate is higher for people who are above, 80, 70 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone can pretty much get the preparation is about really hand hygiene. Like that's why I tell people, stay safe and stay soapy because
Stay soapy.
stay soapy. Like don't forget to wash your hands every interaction. If you can, probably use a hand sanitizer.
Yeah.
The main criteria is pretty much when you're having fever, and then you're sneezing because of the fever, and also dry cough. I think one of the biggest indicators is dry cough.
Oh, okay.
So by the time you get those symptoms, the best way is to just stay at home and notify your primary care provider. And the moment you start feeling shortness of breath, wherein you feel like you're drowning, then that is the time for you to get an urgent care.
Okay.
But so far, if you're young, you're healthy, and you're pretty much manifesting symptoms, the best way right now, the main priority is to quarantine yourself and not to, spread it. The main priority is pretty much containing this pandemic that we're having.
Cedrik is a nurse in a faith-based hospital. It's not an Adventist one, and despite that, Cedrik still sees the Holy Spirit moving and joins him wherever he can.
So one thing that I've noticed as part of our care is that we actually can order a spiritual care for our patients. I used to work in an Adventist health system, and I don't recall a time wherein we can put an order for a consult for a chaplain to come visit a patient.
Okay.
So in this faith-based hospital that I'm working at right now, like we have the autonomy and the freedom to really, if the patient's suffering some anxiety, some becoming very panicky in some sense, especially when they have the fear of the unknown, and that is the time that we could call a chaplain and to really give them the spiritual need that they have. And most of the patients I've handled, I never thought that being the Portland area, I thought at first that there's not as much Christians or believers, but based on the patients that I've cared for so far, I would say 70 to 80% have gotten spiritual care consult.
Wow.
Because they were asking for it.
Wow.
Like they needed that assurance, they needed that comfort. After that consult and having to talk with the patients, there's that sense of, I would say, peace, and at the same time more understanding, even though it's not a medical professional who gave them an explanation of what are the risks, the benefits, but just being there, having someone who can pretty much give you comfort, it gives them a sense of understanding as well that if it happens, like I'm not the one in control,
right,
let's just hope for the better kind of thing. So I think for me too, that's the biggest thing that separates us Christians from non-believers, is that we are hopeful of things. Like for some people, if they die, they die. But for us, when we die, like we are looking for something far greater ahead of us.
Yeah.
And knowing that there's someone in control, not like predestination, but someone's actually wanting what's best for us.
Yeah. I think that's so interesting because the idea, like I'm more and more as I'm talking to people, I'm realizing how simple the solutions are. And it could be as simple as, hey, wash your hands regularly. Just don't go out of the house unless it's absolutely necessary for a season of time. And then even on the spiritual care, just give someone hope. Like it doesn't have to be an in-depth Bible study. It doesn't have to be like this deep prophetic study, but just the idea like, hey, there's a God that's in control and this person loves you. And like, I love that the solutions to this pandemic are so simple, because it means that like, even if I'm not a medical professional, even if I'm not like a spiritual guru or whatever, like there's a role that I can play.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's why sometimes, like not sometimes, but I tell people, leave the medical stuff to the medical people, and leave the spiritual stuff to those who are capable. So for us who are spiritual beings, 100%, the best way that we can handle this is to give comfort to those who are in need.
Yeah.
I think there's one thing that John Mark Comer did, one of the pastors of Bridgetown, where he said, like, there's a time to play the role of Jeremiah, and there's a time to play the role of Isaiah.
There's a time for doomsday, perhaps, and then there's another time for like, no, like it's okay, God's on our side. He's gonna be for you. Yeah, I actually remember reading that post. It was pretty profound. Like,
it is.
The prophetic voice in the church isn't just to like scare people who are complacent. Maybe scare is the wrong word, but like to warn or caution them. It's not just that, but it's also to encourage people who are terrified.
To speak life over them.
To speak life, exactly. I love that. Just like many of the solutions to COVID-19 are very simple, we are seeing that the ways that we can minister to people being very simple as well. For Cedrik, this still includes his work in the hospitals.
So I think there's a different kind of calmness that they would get from you if you're a medical worker or a medical professional. So it's a matter of just pretty much holding their hands, even though like I'm not a guy who is a physical touch kind of guy, especially in the
But you're
medical
Filipino,
field.
you're supposed to be physical touch.
I mean,
you're a nurse, so you got one box checked.
Right. I thought it would be easy for me, but it's quite hard. But sometimes I think this is where I've learned to really listen to the Holy Spirit promptings. Wherein before, like I would say, sometimes in the back of my head, there's that prompting wherein, hey, I think it's a good time to like say something to this guy, to this patient of yours, or at least give him a little pat on the back. And most of the time I would ignore that. But nowadays it's more of like, you know what? If I'm in a place where I have experienced freedom and peace and calmness, how can I share this to other people too?
Yeah.
And it's not sometimes just about the things I say, but the things that I express. And for me, one of the things that I find difficult in terms of my personality is being expressive of my care, of my love. So now I really, when the Holy Spirit tugs me and gives me a little push to say, hey, you know what, hold this old lady's hand, give them a bit of comfort. And when you hold their hands, like for the patients who are agitated, who are anxious, they would calm down.
Yeah. Now, to be clear, you're not holding people's hands that have COVID or whatever the case
is.
Oh,
no.
You know that they're okay. And whatever.
Yeah. But for patients who are pretty much on isolation like COVID, speaking life over them would go a long way.
Cedrik is listening to the Holy Spirit and doing his best to be sensitive to his voice, being attentive to the needs of others and caring for those around him. Although small, this can still make lasting impressions. But through all this, Cedrik is knowing something about our culture and our world, and something that he can learn from it at this time.
That's why sometimes I tell people this is probably the longest Sabbath that we can have.
Yeah, I think Emily, my wife, is like off work for like 6 weeks from the school. Like she can't go to work, and so
even our teacher friends are pretty much just at home and trying to come up with things that they can share. But the main what I was trying to get with that was that this gives other people a taste of what Sabbath is like.
Yeah.
To really pause and to stop from your work and really evaluate what matters to you the most. So I think in my part, it gave me a sense of evaluating my relational posture towards God and towards other people. So just having to connect online and having to call your mom, your dad, how they're doing, it gives you that that thought that, oh, there's so much more to work, there's so much more to my career, there's so much more to the things that I do for fun.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good time to pause amidst all these things that's happening, looking beyond that. It's good to pause, to stop, and really think about what matters most in life. COVID has definitely made us pause. Whether we wanted to or not, whether we were planning on taking some rest, the world has stopped, and now it's time to be thinking about our priorities. But have we had the time to listen to the Holy Spirit, to hear His voice and to follow His leading? What promptings have the Holy Spirit been telling us? And what are our calendars and work and life and everything else distracting us from today?